I've had access to both the PS5 and Xbox Series X for a little over a week now, and in that time I've been testing all kinds of different stuff, not only in terms of gaming, but all the different various services and other special features they have. And I think now I have a pretty good feel on just covering pretty much every aspect we can about both these systems and help you figure out which one is right for you. To begin with, I want to talk about the physical design of these systems, the size of them, how easy it is to set up in different forms, all that kind of good stuff. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on the looks of each system. I think that's very much a personal preference kind of thing. Personally, I do like the simplicity of the Series X a little more, but obviously, what you like more is up to you. What's a more objective thing, though, is the difference in size between the systems, in which case the PS5 is definitely the larger of the two. So it can be a little more difficult to work with as far as incorporating it into some setups. However, really where the PS5 ends up being a bigger issue for me is that if you find yourself in a situation where you need to transport a console often, the larger size of the PS5 along with its awkward shape makes it a little precarious to transport. I actually feel a little worried every time I have to, whereas the Xbox feels much more straightforward since it is basically just a block. One thing worth keeping in mind for placement, especially in the case of the Series X, is location of the vents. For the PS5, it's kind of all around the body of the system, so as long as there's some space to breathe in any directions, you're usually pretty good. With the Series X, all of it is coming out of that top vent or out of the side if you have it laying down sideways, in which case you absolutely want to make sure that does not get obstructed at all. Now, I am speaking of these systems in terms of their setup in tower mode, primarily because this is definitely the angle that both systems are kind of meant to be shown off in. You can tell this based on the orientation of the PlayStation logo on the PS5 and the orientation of the power button on the Xbox Series X. However, they do both support sideways modes if you like. The Series X, I'm not too sold on. I don't really like the way that one looks. For the PS5, I actually found the sideways view really growing on me, and while I do like the look of the Xbox Series X more so, I think PS5 pulls off the kind of balance of tower mode or sideways mode really well, whereas Series X, I basically only want it in tower mode. I will say also that if for whatever reason you like being able to change the orientation of your system a lot more often, the Xbox Series X is very simple. You tilt it, done. PS5, you do have to put in a little extra effort of removing the stand and placing it in different parts of the system. You have to screw it in for tower mode. For sideways mode, you just slot it in and it sits fine on its own, which can be a little bit tedious, but again, kind of like with finding the right place to set up the system. For most people, you're just gonna find the one spot you wanna have it in, the one orientation you wanna leave it in, and then that's where it's gonna be for the conceivable future. And while we're on the subject of talking about the systems themselves, I also want to address really quick as far as the sound goes for both of these. Last generation, one of the big things that Xbox did have a benefit on was that it was a very quiet system, whereas the PS4 was basically a jet engine. That's not really true anymore when it comes to the PS5 versus the Series X. Again, the Series X is very dead quiet like the Xbox One X, whereas the PS5 is also very quiet for the most part. While I've been playing games on the higher graphic setting modes and playing over a long period of time, I have noticed the fan have to kick on every now and then just to push out a little extra heat. But even then, when the fan is going, while it is audible, it's nowhere near the levels that the PS4 was at, which is very refreshing. It is possible that this might change over prolonged periods of use as dust and stuff builds up in the system, but at least for now, after a week of using both, the fan doesn't really kick on all that often, and when it does, it's not that big of a deal. Now, as for the design of the controllers for both these systems, I have done a couple more specific looks at this before. Once again, when it comes to the Xbox, the Series X controller is basically just a slightly modified, ever so slightly upgraded version of the Xbox One X controller, whereas the PlayStation 5 DualSense is a complete overhaul of the DualShock 4. There's a couple things that are similar in terms of button shapes, trigger shapes, location of the sticks, but the grip shape is very different, and there are a whole bunch of new features like haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. Now, as far as the pure comfort of these controllers go, I personally do like the shape of the Series X controller a little bit more. Part of this is because my own bias, I like offset sticks. If you like symmetrical sticks, then obviously the DualSense is going to appeal a little more to you. As far as just the grip shape of these both go, though, they are both very comfortable. What really sets the DualSense apart, though, is its additional new features. This is something that I ranted about a lot recently in a video called Why I Love the PS5, and really one of the biggest aspects of it is the new features in the DualSense are just absolutely amazing. Not every single game at launch right now is taking full advantage of it, but especially in something like Astro's Playroom, which is designed to really show off all these different features, it's just amazing the kind of variety of feelings you can get from haptic feedback, and adaptive triggers are a revelation as far as having a new approach to how controls can feel in certain games. By comparison, the Xbox Series X controller is still a very comfortable controller and does have some nifty new add-ons like a share button as well as a redesigned D-pad that I do like, but ultimately it is a much more baseline controller that, to be fair, you can also buy individual ones for cheaper, whereas the DualSense definitely feels like a step forward in terms of something brand new, which I really like. Also on the subject of controllers, something that's always been kind of a big debate between Xbox and PlayStation that dates back to the PS3 and the Xbox 360 is that, once again, the Xbox controller still relies on AA batteries, whereas the DualSense relies on being recharged. I do think there is a merit to the Xbox controller supporting batteries, but at this point, I would really appreciate if at least with the system, when you buy it, it came with a play and charge kit automatically. I just think it's kind of a default thing now that you should have a rechargeable controller from the get-go. At the end of the day, these are both great controllers, but as far as special new features go and just being something a little bit different, I do like the PlayStation 5 more in this regard. Of course, the physical design of these systems and their controllers is just a surface level look at them. What's really important is how they are once they're up and running. Before diving into gameplay, I just want to talk a little bit about the UI experience with both of these. I actually have really enjoyed the UI for both, but for entirely different reasons. The Series X UI at first glance looks very similar to the Xbox One, and in terms of like the basic idea of it, it pretty much is. However, this is a much more upgraded, customizable, and honestly just flat out better UI. It's entirely handled in a timeline style effect where you have your most recent games at the top, and then below that are a number of different sections that are totally customizable. Whether you want to have some favorite games or media apps listed, the store, different functions of the system, it's all stuff that you can swap in and out as you like, which I really appreciate. On the flip side though, it does require a little bit more attention on your part as far as figuring out what you want, taking the time to set it up, and it is a very busy looking interface. By comparison, the PS5 doesn't really give you that much in terms of UI customization. However, it is a very clean, sleek-looking design that is very beautiful to look at. I really appreciate the concept of when you're highlighting different games, they each have their own little wallpaper and accompanying music. It's just a really cool vibe. And I will say that of the two UIs, I did find the PS5 to be the more intuitive of the two, primarily because, again, there's not a whole lot in terms of customization. It just simply has a very clean, nicely organized way of approaching all the main content. Overall, I think these are both really solid UIs. It really just comes down a little more to personal preference. PlayStation, very minimal, pretty, and gets the kind of basics job done. If you like the idea of having more refined control though, and you don't mind something that's maybe a little busier looking, Xbox is a really great design as well. I think it's worth noting too, the PS5 has a lot of new interesting things happening feature-wise as far as its UI goes. In particular, there's the new card system, which gives you kind of an easy shorthand to see your progress on a variety of different trophies, and the ability to look up in-game help guides for certain situations, which is heavily integrated into a lot of the first-party Sony titles. The PS5's pop-up menu also features this nice little handy switcher feature, which gives you kind of a list of your most often used or most recently used apps. You can quickly jump between them, which is really great. However, in comparison to the Xbox, it does actually kind of highlight one of the parts that I think Xbox has a really cool lead in, which is the concept of quick resume, where you can be jumping between multiple games and resume from the same point. At first glance on the PS5, when you're used to quick resume on the Xbox, you would think that the switcher option would have that kind of thing as well. No, though, it does give you a way to quickly access games, but ultimately, if you launch one title and then try to switch back to another, it's going to keep having to fully relaunch the game each time. This is not a thing where you can have multiple games in a suspended state. Speaking of games, this is obviously the main reason why any of you are thinking of buying one of these systems. And so some of the big questions are, of course, things like exclusive options in each one and how multi-platform games compare on each system. Now, when we were getting ready for this generation, a very large part of the conversation was that on paper, the Xbox Series X is a much more powerful system. And based on the kinds of studies we're seeing of different games, I'm definitely referencing a lot from Digital Foundry, who does really great in-depth tech dives about games and comparing them on multiple platforms. It looks like a lot of multi-platform games coming out right now are actually pretty close in terms of performance. Now, it might be that as time goes on, we see more games better optimized for each system, and there may be a more noticeable gap, but for now, it's really not that large. What really ends up being a bigger benefit for Xbox isn't the difference in performance, but in special video modes. Specifically, the ability to support variable refresh rate, which means that if you have a TV that supports FreeSync, games that might usually suffer from things like, say, screen tearing, which happens a lot in some titles like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, will have that smoothed out and look much better, which is really nice. And the Series X also features Dolby Vision, which is basically beefed up, more powerful HDR. Now, these are features that you must have a proper TV to support them, so if you don't currently have one that has those features, it's kind of a moot point which system makes more sense for you. But if you are planning on buying a new TV sometime soon, or you're planning on upgrading in the near future, it's worth noting that those kind of special features are things that the Xbox can take advantage of that, at least for now, the PS5 does not have. Sony has said that they will be bringing variable refresh rate support to the PS5 eventually. We just don't have a date on that quite yet. One weird thing worth noting is that if you really like the idea of using a gaming monitor for your system rather than a TV, specifically the PS5 does not support pushing out a 1440p signal. It's only 1080 or 4K, whereas the Series X does allow you to do those different in-between resolutions. So for PS5, you're only going to be able to make use of 1080 on a 1440p monitor unless it happens to be one of those ones that accepts a 4K signal and downscales it, in which case that's what's going to happen with your PS5. On the flip side of things though, while the Xbox is the stronger of the two systems, I would argue that right now, the PS5 has more games that are doing a great job of showcasing what next gen can really look like. There are some great multi-platform titles on both systems, but as of right now, Xbox is definitely a little light on the exclusives. We do have some coming soon. The Medium is going to be in early December. We are getting Halo Infinite sometime next year, but by comparison, PlayStation 5 already has a number of exclusives out, like Spider-Man Miles Morales, Sackboy, Demon's Souls, multiple games that really look great while offering fluid frame rates and just honestly showcase, I think more so, what we expect next-gen games to look like. Xbox is eventually going to have more titles like that. Aside from the ones we already know about, Microsoft has been very aggressive on gaining a lot of new first-party companies, one of the biggest, of course, most recently being Bethesda. So there's definitely going to be some more interesting exclusive talk down the line for these two, but as of right now, the conversation is very much what it was like for PS4 versus Xbox One, in which PlayStation just has more right now. Speaking of last-gen systems, something that's been a pretty big talking point for this generation is also how each system is approaching backwards compatibility. And this is an area that overall, I think Xbox has a pretty strong advantage in. Backwards compatibility is something they're already very heavily focusing on with the Xbox One, having a very large library of Xbox 360 titles that worked for it, and a handful of big hit original Xbox titles as well. All those games work on the Xbox Series X, as well as the complete Xbox One catalog. By comparison, the PS5 supports just the PS4, and even then, there are some stipulations to how some of this works. There are titles that maybe come with a bit of a warning of, hey, this one will run, but there might be some issues, and there are a small number of games, honestly, none of which super matter very hard, that just don't work on the PS5 at all. Something I think is really worth pointing out for Xbox as well is that not only does it have a very large and extensive back catalog of backwards compatible titles, but it's even gone the next step of actually offering more ways of enhancing the experience of those games by offering a new feature called Auto HDR, which adds HDR effects to backwards compatible titles where, HDR didn't exist yet. There are some games where this might end up being a little more miss than hit. Some games will have it automatically disabled, but for a large number of titles, they are getting these Auto HDR enhancements and look a lot more colorful and just flat out better. Also, if you're coming from the standpoint of having owned a previous system going into the next one, I also think Xbox did do a better job of handling bringing your old library over. You can freely install games onto your Xbox Series X, and any progress you made on the Xbox One is just automatically downloaded because that's how they handle cloud saves. It's a very seamless system that doesn't really require a whole lot of thought on your part. PS5, on the other hand, you do have to go out of your way to make sure you download cloud saves. You might have to double check to make sure you were actually even uploading them on your PS4 in the first place. There's just a couple extra hoops you have to jump through to make sure you bring all your data over from the previous generation, whereas Xbox basically removed all thought about that. One other little annoying aspect too is that when it comes to cross-generation titles going from PS4 to PS5, save data transfer is not an automatic thing. It is a game-by-game basis, so some titles like Spider-Man Remastered have had that functionality added in, but it is not a for sure thing on all cross-platform titles, whereas with Xbox, once again, your saves are automatically shared between those versions. The advantage Xbox has for backwards compatibility also extends to their approach to accessories. Basically, any accessory that worked on the Xbox One is going to work on the Xbox Series X or S totally fine. PlayStation, on the other hand, is a little more selective. In particular, the DualShock 4, and really any PS4 Pro controller for that matter, only work when playing backwards compatible titles on the PS5. You cannot play PS5 games unless you are using the brand new DualSense or some other more specialty situations. If you want to use a DualShock 4, only going to work on PS4 stuff. Where this gets really interesting and kind of funny to me is that Backwards compatibility has been extended to more specialized options like, say, a fight stick or a racing wheel, headsets. A lot of these things are working, and in fact, while the PS5 is stopping me from using a PS4 to play, say, Spider-Man Miles Morales, it's totally okay with me trying to play it with a PS4 fight stick. Sure. Ultimately, if your main concern is playing games from the last generation of systems with PS4 and Xbox One, most of the games that you're actually going to care about or even try to grab are going to run perfectly fine on both these systems. In general, there's a lot more going on for Xbox, but ultimately if your goal is to just play the big hits, you're going to have a very similar experience here. While we're talking about game library, another thing that's an important thing to look at for both these systems are their additional membership services. Now, in the case of Xbox, they've recently put a lot of work into kind of overhauling and replacing the previous Xbox Gold with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, which not only offers all the benefits of things like being able to play games online, getting a couple free games every month, but the biggest thing is, of course, the constantly rotating list of games that you can play just totally for free as part of the membership. PlayStation, by comparison, still is running PS Plus, which offers all the normal benefits like being able to play online, all that good stuff, free games every month. They are not offering any kind of actual Game Pass service just yet, but as a way to get you started on the PS5, they do have a PS Plus greatest hits selection, where a number of some of the biggest hit games from the PS4 are just totally free for you to download and experience on the PS5. A great way to get started if you didn't own a PS4 and you want to play some catch up on some of those titles. PlayStation does also offer a separate subscription service you can get called PlayStation Now, which doesn't allow you to download games for free like Game Pass, but does give you the ability to stream play a library of older titles. Something that both these systems now offer that was previously a PS4 function is the ability to play your systems remotely using a phone or tablet. Again, also as part of Game Pass, if you use an Android device, you can also play Game Pass games through there as well. Ultimately, remote play feels very similar for both these as far as just being able to smoothly play games as long as you're connected to Wi-Fi and you have a pretty good internet connection. The only really major important difference I think that's worth bringing up with these two is that PlayStation is very selective with what controllers you can use. It supports on-screen touch controls as well as the ability to use a DualSense or DualShock 4 controller, while the Xbox doesn't have on-screen controls but does allow you to use a much larger array of controllers, especially if you're an Android user. There's a whole bunch of different branded options out there. There's a whole bunch of different styles, so if you don't necessarily want to use a traditional Xbox controller, you got more choices out there. On the other hand, while the PS5 is restrictive, ultimately you're going to have access to a DualSense because it came with your system, and if you don't have any controller on hand at all, you can still use remote play thanks to the on-screen touch controls. Now, of course, if you're planning on buying a lot of games for these two systems, something else that's very important to keep in mind is storage space. Both of these systems have now moved on to SSDs, allowing for much faster loading speeds. It's one of the big upgrades of this generation, but a trade-off of that is that it's a much more expensive component of the system and has limited the max space that they're launching with. The Xbox Series X starting with 1 terabyte, which is really more like 802 gigabytes of useful space, whereas the PS5 is starting with 825 gigabytes, which is really 667 gigs of usable space. It's also worth noting the PS5's SSD does have a higher transfer speed than the Xbox's, though Microsoft would argue that one of the new aspects of their system's velocity architecture does a better job of optimizing and making use of the speed their SSD has, ultimately resulting in still very fast loading times. In practice, most games are loading up faster on the PS5 compared to the Series X, with a couple exceptions here and there, though the difference is small enough that it's honestly not that appreciable. As for expanding the storage, Xbox requires that you buy a proprietary memory card design they're selling, which right now there's only one option that comes from Seagate, but more are going to be released eventually. Whereas PlayStation, you can just buy regular NVMe SSD storage. However, you do have to make sure it meets a certain minimum speed requirement, and it's not quite as simple to include. Rather than just simply plugging in the back, you do have to open the PS5 up and slot it into an expansion port. It's also important to note that while we know how you can expand storage on the PS5, it's actually something you can't do just yet. This is going to be patched in later on down the line, hopefully sometime soon. Big takeaway here, Xbox's solution is very convenient, while PlayStation's is a little more annoying to actually install and use, does give you a much greater freedom in terms of what you can buy and install. Keep in mind that when we're talking about expandable storage with things like the Seagate card or the internal expansion for the PS5, this is specifically for the kind of storage that is necessary to play PS5 and Xbox Series X games. So when it comes to Xbox One and PS4 games, you can run those off of a traditional external drive, and that's honestly what I heavily recommend doing if you plan on bringing a lot forward. That way you can keep all the internal storage nice and free and open for all the next-gen content that's coming out. Aside from gaming, there are of course other special features and uses these systems both offer. When it comes to media streaming apps, right now there are a lot more available on Xbox compared to PS5. Part of this is likely because of PS5's new OS, so we'll likely see some apps get added over time that are currently missing, one noticeable one being HBO Max. Also, like with gaming, one of the additional benefits for the Xbox Series X is that Dolby Vision support. So again, Dolby Vision is a TV-specific feature, so if your TV doesn't support that, not something you necessarily have to worry about. When it comes to the sharing aspects of these systems, both of them offer ways of recording short clips of gameplay as well as taking screenshots. However, there is a little more the PS5 is capable of doing as far as sharing larger pieces of content, whereas the Xbox has some nice convenient features. On the PS5 side of things, you can record much longer segments of gameplay, going as long as possibly an hour with the correct kind of resolution settings. The Xbox Series X, by comparison, caps out at 3 minutes. And the PS5, of course, has a new interesting feature in that you can directly share your screen with other PS5 users so they can see what you're playing at the same time, which is really neat. Xbox doesn't have these features, but one convenient thing I do like about it is the simplicity in sharing things that you record. For instance, if you take a screenshot or a short clip of gameplay on the PS5, you can only share that using specific social media networks supported by it. Otherwise, you have to use an actual thumb drive to bring it over and take it to something else like a PC. On Xbox, what you record is going to be uploaded to the Xbox app, and you can then access that screenshot and use it however you want, which is really nice. Of course, all of this has been focusing on the top-of-the-line versions of these systems. There are cheaper versions available as well. The PS5 has the PS5 All Digital, which is $100 off and just gets rid of the disc drive. That's it. Whereas the Xbox has the Xbox Series S, which does have some performance drops. Part of the original promise of this was that it would still perform the same outside of resolution, but we're seeing with third-party games that isn't entirely true. For instance, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is 60 frames on Series X, but only 30 frames on the Series S. However, the Series S is also by far the cheapest system out of all the current Gen 1, so if you're just looking for a cheap way to get into gaming, it's a great choice. I will say that if you're willing to give up on physical games and go all digital, the PS5 All Digital is the best value out of all of these, giving you the performance of the top-line systems at the lower price point. Not as low as the Series S, but considering everything else you're gaining, totally worth it. So as you can see, there's a lot of things to consider as far as what each system's currently doing well, what features they each offer, the games you can play, and ultimately, honestly, I think it comes down to the fact that these are both really fun systems and there isn't necessarily a wrong way to go. It really bothers me when someone tries to simplify this argument as, oh, well, this one's just flat out better, and that's just honestly not the case, especially with this generation. You might care about different specific things than I do, which might affect your decision, but the main takeaway for me has really been the fact that the Xbox Series X has a number of great features and performance that just makes it the go-to choice for me for a lot of multi-platform games, not really because of the performance difference or higher specs, but because of a number of very useful, nice features like Dolby Vision support, variable refresh rate support, and quick resume. Meanwhile, while the PS5 does fall a little bit behind on a couple different features, honestly, it has some of the most interesting, unique things to me that really get me excited about next gen, including some great exclusive titles that you can play right now, and more than anything, honestly, the DualSense controller offering new forms of immersion and gameplay is the most exciting aspect of this generation for me. Funny enough, despite all the differences and changes that these systems bring, I kind of find myself really just falling back to what I did with the Xbox One X and PS4. The Xbox is my home for multi-platform games and having a large digital library, making use of Game Pass, whereas the PS5 is where I'm going for really targeted experiences, especially with their exclusive titles that I'm very excited for. Now, all of this is also very subject to change. This is the opening launch time for both these systems. There are software updates that can happen for both of them. There are new games coming out for both of them. Like we mentioned earlier, Xbox has a lot of new studios, so who knows what can happen with that in the next couple years. So we are definitely going to revisit this 6 months from now, a year from now. Stuff is definitely going to be constantly in flux. But the main thing right now, I don't think there's a wrong choice here. Pick up the one that matches your needs best and have fun.